Great. Good evening. Thank you, Anne, for the introduction. It's with great pleasure for me to be here tonight to introduce our lecturer, Tatiana Bilbao. She founded Tatiana Bilbao, a studio located in Mexico City in 2004, and has since become one of the most successful architects of our generation. From my perspective, a clear generational shift is taking place, a shift away from the complicated spectacles and the shockingly new towards a more thoughtful, holistic, and considered approach to the built environment. Tatiana has played a leading role in this shift. On a personal note, I first met her on a remote site for a speculative architectural project, Ordos 100, curated by Jacques Herzog and Ai Weiwei, where 100 young architects from around the world were invited to design a large clientless house. Even at that time, she was simply a force, producing thoughtful and beautiful work, and remains the same today. And speaking to the next generation, any new feminists in the audience, I would like to remind everyone that our profession needs to acknowledge the importance of mentors and diversity in such mentors. It seems urgent to note that it remains difficult to be a woman in architecture, and a sole woman practitioner even tougher, despite all of the progress that has been made. We just can't take that for granted. To that end, Tatiana embodies traits essential to such a role by her commitment to the discipline, to acknowledgement that the built environment is constructed by a process of making architecture first and foremost, to engaging in conditions of reality that are approached with a fearless and tireless pursuit for creating work that is elegant, memorable, tactile, and engrossing. Her work has shifted my own thinking about architecture, about housing, about cities, about practice, and fundamentally about the importance of design across all scales, no matter how large or small of a project. She constructs architecture that is always connected to its community, to the site, to the environment, but that is also beautiful and warm and experimental with its materiality, construction, and spaces. In 2007, she was awarded the Emerging Voices title at the Architecture League, Design Vanguard by Architecture Record, and received a 2014 Global Award for Sustainable Architecture by the Locus Fund, also part of UNESCO. She is currently teaching at GSAP Columbia University and presented this year's Transcripts in Housing lecture, and in the spring will hold the Norman R. Professorship in Architecture at Yale University. She is a graduate from Architecture and Urbanism at Universidad Iberoamericana and worked as an advisor for urban projects at the Urban Housing and Development Department of Mexico City. Her recent work includes sustainable housing prototype that was part of the Chicago Architecture Biennial, residential buildings in Lyon, France, a contemporary art museum in Spain, a solo house project, and her work is held in the permanent collection of Centre Pompidou, the Art Institute of Chicago, among others. Please join me in welcoming Tatiana.
Wow, thank you very much. Thank you, Hilary, for such an incredible introduction. I think I never heard anything that nice of my work. And thank you everybody for being here. For me, it's an honor to be here, and especially I want to thank Anne and Rosalie for inviting me to this lecture series, and to be in this auditorium, which just a week ago had an incredible discourse. I hope, I feel humble about being here, and I hope I can get it to the standards of this auditorium. So I wanted to focus tonight's my lecture in a topic that it's really present now in our office, which is about living. And for that, I'm going to present the soul structure that it represents for me, living, which is a house. And I'm going to be speaking of several examples on how we've been approaching the topic using the program of the house, or, well, using it sounds a little bad, but using it in a good way of the word. And I wanted to put you a little bit in context. When I started studying architecture, Mexico was becoming global. Was the moment where Mexico started to open to the world, for us to say. And I remember very well nights of doing models in my house and hearing my friends doing lines outside the first McDonald's that opened in Mexico. For me, that's the memory for me that moment was happening when I was studying. So I started studying with very traditional tools and very traditional way of learning architecture. But at the same time, we had all these information coming from what was happening around the world. So parametrism was the trend, was what was happening, and we were wanted to incorporate that, what we were listening and hearing from outside, to what we were doing in their school. So it was a bit confusing, I must say. At the moment, it was also exciting. It was exciting to have this duality of being really learning in a very traditional way. We were hand drawing, doing models, and at the same time listening to all these ideas about designing with computers and parameters and algorithms. And obviously we wanted to be part of that world. So I started doing architecture thinking I was going to be like that generation of architects. I wanted to be in that generation of architects. And when I started working, it was not until like 5 years after I started my own office, which I realized where I was. Like, it took a while. And it took an important project that ironically we didn't design. No, it was a house that we built with Gabriel Orozco. Gabriel Orozco is one of the most important contemporary artists, and I'm going to tell just very little the story how we met. When we just got out of school, we had no commissions, no real jobs. So we started doing a lot of competitions, and any competition that was out there, we were doing a submission, but we also were inventing our work, almost as if it was the continuation of our academic life. And we were doing houses in the moon because we thought it was a good exercise. But we were also designing houses for Gabriel Orozco, and we did design a house for Gabriel Orozco without knowing him, knowing his work. It was very little known in Mexico, but we knew his work, and we liked it very much. We became friends, and we designed a house for him just by analyzing his work. It was a very academic project in a good sense. It had a lot of research, and we were just dreaming about a house for Gabriel Orozco. And then we decided to present the house to him. So we looked for him, we found him. He gave us a meeting, and then we presented the house for him, and this is how we met. 5 years after, long story short, he knocked in my door with a model saying, "Tatiana, you need to help me with my model." So you never know who you work for. And so that was incredible. When he arrived, he had a very specific idea of building the exact replica of an observatory in India, in a really nice spot in the shores of Puerto Escondido. And although I tried to convince him that for me that was not architecture as I knew it at that time, that he should focus in doing art and I should help him doing architecture if he was intending to do a house. I was kind of naive, obviously, saying that to him. And he obviously said, "Well, you know, Tatiana, this is not architecture. This is part of my work. I want to do this as part of my work, and it's going to be a replica of the observatory, the Yantar Mantar in India, and I want to inhabit that observatory as a house. So if you want to help me, you can. Otherwise, I'll look for someone else." Of course, I did. It was an incredible process of understanding many things and about even opening my mind about what architecture could mean in many senses. But the first thing and the most important thing that I learned at that time was to understand that architecture should understand the context where it relies on, where it is erected, where it goes to, and who is building it. And I learned that the tough way, obviously, because I really thought it was going to be very easy to build a house that was totally geometrically perfectly described. It was a semi-sphere in the center, hold even structurally with 4 cubes, and it was super easy. Well, we arrived to site, and we realized that the people there didn't know how to even read, so plans out of the question. Nobody would see our plans that we drawn for a year beautifully, because Gabriel Orozco was on the top of them. And then I realized that we obviously were building with people, local people in a remote place, that this was probably one of the most extreme cases, but these are the people that build our architecture in Mexico, basically. People from these little towns that immigrate to the cities, the first job they get is in the construction business. What do they do? They get there, they don't have any skills, they don't have any knowledge, but they learn, and they learn through experience. They're very, very creative, they're very open, they're very flexible. So those are the good things that we have, and that's how I learned to do real architecture, I think. And the second thing I learned, it was that for the conception of architecture is about the inhabitants of the space, and how a human being can really have a better life, even if it sounds like a cliche, in a space, or a worse life, depending on the space. Absolutely. And this is, I said, because for me it was really strange in the beginning to think that we were going to adapt a structure conceived for an observatory to be a living space. And for me that really was a problem in my mind. And it was a problem the whole time, even when we finished the work. And then we finished the work, and the first moment that the family inhabited the house, they invited me. And I realized a very important thing. Gabriel had really chosen a structure that worked for the way of his life perfectly. This structure enhanced his life. And even though this structure was conceived to be an observatory, this is how his life really, really worked. And it was represented in this structure. And for me, that was incredible, how obviously he's an incredible, sensible person, and he's an artist, and he's one of the best there. So he knows that perfectly, but I didn't. And for me, was so important how, for him, it was easy to choose his way, no? It was easy to choose a structure that he knew it would really, really help improve his life rather than restrict it. But then it's the task of us to do that, if we know that, and if we have that knowledge, which is very hard to get it, because we have to get to know the people who's living it, but we have that task on us, which for me, it's a big responsibility. And then we got this commission of this house, which it really allows to think also many other things. The client arrived to our office with the idea of building this incredible structure. She was describing a house with double heights, open views, huge windows to the lake. There's a lake in front of the house, and also some overlooking to the mountains, and describing a really beautiful house of 3,000 square feet, more or less. And at the end, she went, "Oh, by the way, I just have $100,000. That's all." And she left, and I said, "Well, we have a problem. We really have to tell her that she has to decrease her idea in half, or double the budget, because we're not going to get there with that amount of money and the things that she wants for the house." And then I kept thinking I was going to meet her the next day to tell her all these. And then I thought, well, she's going to go out, she's going to not hire us, she's going to hire someone else, she's going to try to do that because this is what she wants. She wants that type of house with that type of money. And what's going to happen, we're not going to do architecture, so we better do it. And so she arrived and said, okay, we have a big challenge because we have a big problem to achieve, which is creating all the house that you want with all that little money. And so I just wanted you to know that we're going to make everything possible to do it, and if we don't, we're going to stop the project in the middle, but I think we can. And she was courageous enough to say, okay, let's do it. And let's do this research that we did for almost 6 months, I think. So before we started designing, we started thinking on a strategy on how we could build this house with the size she wanted and the money she had. So first we said we need to find a material that would really allow us to do that. A material that it's innocent enough to help us do these like almost a utopic idea of building this house with this money. And I just had recently visited the school that Mauricio Rocha did in Oaxaca. So I thought maybe exploring compacted earth would work. For me, it sounded like really straightforward that it was going to work, and it did. So we studied the material. We never built with it, although it's the oldest material that, one of the oldest material that human has used to build. And we learned how it was. We learned the possibilities of the material, but we decided, obviously, to use it in a very strict, most simplest way of using it, because we needed to stay in costs within the budget. So, as I said, we first understood like the plasticity of this material, the brutality also of this material, the strengthness of the material, and then we started designing. We created a scheme of only 2 squares that are aligned to the lake and 2 squares that are imposed in an angle that it's up to a tree. And then thinking and modeling the whole house to the model of the frame that the guy that was going to build had, because we needed to save every single peso that we could to really arrive to the amount of square meters. So the private and the public spaces of the house are in these 2 cubes that are aligned to the lake, and the other 2 that are more in diagonal, they have like more the service areas and terraces included. We wanted to understand or to obviously have a material that would allow us to do everything. It needed to do everything. It needed to be the structure, it needed to be the thermical definition, it needed to be the aesthetic definition of the house, it needed to be everything. So in that order, we were discarding materials. So first we said, okay, concrete is out of our budget, so that's discarded. Wood in Mexico, we cannot build with wood. We don't have wood to build, so wood is out of the question. Then brick, we wouldn't need a substructure, and it would not allow us to be the structure, so we needed a secondary structure, and that would be out of our budget, limiting our possibilities. Steel, out of the question, and then this is how we arrived to compacted earth. So in this case, the earth does everything. It's the structure, so it has nothing but the earth in between. So it's a concrete slab, the earth, and concrete roof. We did obviously everything with the minimum details, minimum amount of money possible in order to really create the amount of space she wanted, even like the heights and the views she wanted to take advantage of from the site. This work really showed us many things. Well, in this case, in this image, you're seeing these tubes are the rain drainage from the roofs, from the tilted roofs, and all the support of the house is done with the walls and the earth. We wanted to really achieve doing something for her that would really be something that a space that represented her, that allowed her to really enjoy the place as much as she wanted, as she described it the first day she arrived. And so this is why we kept the rest to the minimum. We really needed to define the space, the amount of the space and the space, the majestuosity of the space, for us to say it, and keep the rest to the minimum. I think we really find a connection there because she's very much like that. And we did it for a reason, for a very probably even selfish reason, to really build something. as I said, because otherwise we wouldn't have got the commission. But also I think we did it because we truly thought we could help her and not let her do this work with someone just out there, a builder, a contractor that would even would have failed completely, you know. The earth we used from the site, so it was also like a beautiful idea of bringing up the earth there, and we decided specifically to use a little tint to create a sense of scale within these very heavy walls, because this is a small house. So if you see in detail, like up to the human eyes view, you have a tinted part, and the rest goes more with the natural color of the earth. It's funny because years after we completed this house, she arrived back to the office with the idea of commissioning us to do her house, her everyday house in Guadalajara. This is in Ajijic, which is a little town, weekend town in the shores of a lake named Chapala in the state of Jalisco, where Guadalajara is the capital. She lives in Guadalajara, and she decided to commission us to build her house. That has taken us 5 years. We thought we knew her, and this is when we also learn how different we are when we're thinking in a space of leisure, which this is a space for her of leisure, than a space where we inhabit every day. It was amazing how we really thought we knew her. We said, okay, we're doing a house for you. We know all the tricks. Yeah, we know how you like the bathrobes hanging there. Yeah, we know. Well, we didn't. We didn't know any of her obsessions or his obsessions. The husband was really involved, whereas in this one, he was never appearing. And it made us also think about that. It made us also think about how we think differently, even if we're the same people with the same restrictions and culture, everything, in inhabiting two different spaces. That has been also a topic of researching the office. Beyond that, and it went a little bit with what happened with this commission. So in this case, there's a different person, totally different person, different context. This is in Monterrey, which is the second largest city after Mexico City in Mexico. It's in the northeast of the country, and it's a very industrial city, very rich city, and there's an incredible site in the mountains where a family has different plots, and every like the grandmother would leave to her sons and grandsons a piece of land, a huge piece of land. There's a big mountain there. And so the only condition that the grandmother said to everyone is they should really do something that inspired everyone else and hire a good architect. This is what's her idea. And so we have done 2 houses in this place, and this was the second one, actually. We did one first. And for 2 grandsons, they're cousins, so they're not brothers and sisters. And this one, she doesn't live in Monterrey, she lives in Mexico, and again, it's a leisure house. And she wanted to come to Monterrey, she wanted to have a house there to see her family, to not having to stay in her mother's or father's house, and to be there and enjoy the place, but more than that, to really have like a root place where she's from. That was kind of a contradiction, because she also wanted to be in the forest and live in the forest, and so we decided to create a house that had 3 little pavilions. So we divided the program completely, and we created a space where it's like the living area, a little kitchen and a bathroom, then 2 other pavilions that only contain sleeping rooms. One for kids or guests, and one more dedicated for the couple that was commissioning us. And we decided to even put these 3 pavilions in kind of a contradiction to themselves and to the site, in using the first pavilion as a mirror house. A mirror house that, because literally she wanted to be in the forest with the forest around her. And but at the same time, she was asking for a house, for a piece of architecture. So we decided to confront these things using mirror, but we also wanted to create like this idea of inhabiting the place with the earth and the earth around. So we created a brick, a tile that it uses the mold of a roof tile, and to create like some of the spaces, but also to do one of the pavilions. So the first pavilion, which is the living one, it's the mirror pavilion. And as I said, she wanted to be in the forest. So we said, okay, you are in the forest, but when you're in the house, you're within the architecture, and the architecture multiplies itself. No? So where you're in the house, you have the nature surrounding you, but the architecture imposes to the nature, and it multiplies, and it goes infinite. The interior is, it's very open, a very open, flexible space. The secondary material we use in this pavilion is the tile that you see little in your right. And the roof tile that we cut it and used for screens, and in this case for the floor. And then we use a tertiary material, which is the wood, that it's wrapping kind of the roof for the kitchen and the more intimate space that becomes part of the area where the food is prepared. So then we decided to do the second pavilion, the second set of rooms, with a really piece of imposing architecture to nature with the tile. So these two rooms are really imposing a footprint to nature, and they're just two rooms that they're open completely to the forest, but they are protected. They protect you from the weather. They're very formal rooms, and they use the tile to be the structure of the house, and the wood as a secondary material to create all the interior space, the furniture, the beds, everything. And the tertiary material, which allows you to have the relationship with the forest, which is the glass. The third pavilion, which is not built yet, it's designed in wood. And the whole idea is to have all these three materials that could represent different things in a way of interacting with the landscape in different ways, for a little bit saying to her, you know, there's different ways to inhabit a landscape, but it is always inhabiting a landscape, no? It's always, architecture is not landscape. And we finished this house very recently. I don't know when we're gonna do the third wood structure, but our idea with that, it was like using nature to create architecture, because we're using the wood. In Monterrey, it's easier to get wood to build in this small structure. It's capable, it's doable to do it with earth. The house for her cousin, which we did first in the same area, is this one. And this was started 2008, the design, and it was built 2012. And we recently just did an addition. Not an addition, it was like a second phase, and we finally finalized the house. Which at the beginning, when I met this family, they had 4 children, and I knew they were going to have more. Now they have 6, and they took me to the site. They were very open on sharing their family experiences, way of living. That was very good. I remember I was very, very happy that I was really like almost half of the day listening to all the stories, how they lived, how they do their daily activities. And when they finish up, they said, well, we want a house that it's flat. We want a house that it described like with 10,000 square feet of program. And we want a flat house because we want really a family that flows in a horizontal direction. This is how we are, and this is how we feel. And then I said, well, I really would like to understand that much better, because we need to translate that into a structure that hangs from a hill. So we cannot do a flat house here. I hope you understand, because otherwise we have to, or fly, like do a structure that flies away from the hill, or like dig half of the hill to create a flat structure. So, so we understood a little bit about the flow of the house, of the family. They didn't want it to have this big hierarchy of spaces, like having the kids on the top, and for them it represented kind of the second floor was the kids area, and the first floor was like the grown-ups area, and they didn't want it that. So what we did is we created a system of starting with thinking of a pentagon. Why a pentagon and not a square? Two things. The first thing, I think we still couldn't think about squares. Pentagon was kind of different. We were still in the idea of understanding how different geometries could allow us to do contemporary architecture. And so with this, starting with a pentagon would allow us to, as I said, not do a square, but also allow us to a little bit more adapt to the forms that we could find in the place, in the site, in the hill. So we started with a pentagon, and then we unfold this pentagon into different geometries, creating other spaces. What we did here is also divide the program in the most divisible possible way. So every volume, it's a program. So a room is a program, the living room is a program. So every volume has a different function. This allowed us to start like aligning all these volumes into the landscape, with the landscape, working with the trees inside, the hill, the rocks, the big rocks that were there, the topography, and also the idea of the flow. So every room is like 2 or 3 steps from the other one. So you flow in the house, just going by up and down by 1 or 2 levels, 1 or 2 steps, and it creates a continuous relationship within spaces, and this is what they wanted. In a way, we interpreted their idea of the flat house this way in a hill. And basically, I think also architecture needs to understand a little bit not only their context, but the situation of the family and of the social situation. No? The possibilities that the possibilities and the information that the family can give, can inform to architecture is incredibly important, and I think we value it even more after this project that we did. There is an escape way, so there's a staircase in the middle of it, so you don't have to meander around the whole house to arrive to the other end. You can go directly, but you can also go from one room to the next one. The landscape played a role here, definitely. It played completely a role in deciding where the house was placed, where the houses sit, where the house would present itself, would the family would have to shape their living or to adapt their idea of fluidity because of the landscape. And then we were commissioned years after, very recently, 2 years ago probably, to do a house in this solo house project where Hilary and Michael are also doing a project. It's an incredible site in the middle of nowhere, in Catalonia, in the border of Aragon. And it's a French client that when he commissioned us, he said he wanted to do this project, commissioning different architects to give them the possibility to the architect of experiment or think on the topic of a house without having a client. So we don't have a client, the client is him, and he says he doesn't direct projects anywhere. And so he really wanted us to think on doing a house with no client, a house for anybody. And we instead of doing that, what we did, we said, why don't we continue our idea of researching the the point of habiting, of living, of inhabiting a place. This is a leisure house, again. This is, the intention is that this is weekend houses. It's, as I said, in the middle of nowhere, and it's difficult to get there. It's clearly a vacation place. And so our first approach was to create a very impositive structure to even force you to discover the landscape, or even impose you to discover the landscape. So we did a house that it's kind of a promenade or a pilgrimage, with a pyramid-like, to force you to see the landscape in different levels. Just that, as simple as that. We thought that in order to achieve like the highest or possible views was necessary to do a tower. Then we thought, how could we do a house that would allow you to get there without just being sucked into a cube and going up, or stairs going up? And so this is how we created this passage of a structure that became the house at the same time. Unfortunately, or fortunately, because I think we even developed a better scheme, it was not approved by the people of the place, the municipality, and we had to rethink the whole scheme. It was not approved because it didn't go well with the landscape. This is what they said. And it was definitely an imposition to the landscape, but our way of thinking was it was even thinking on the landscape. But well, we moved on and we said, okay, about thinking this idea of exposing you to different moments of the landscape and forcing you to do it, how can we do that with a different structure that doesn't impose to the landscape? How can we also make you a pilgrimage to different parts of the house and then force you to enjoy different moments of the place with a structure that is way more simpler and that could not have this impact into the landscape? So we created a set of modules with small variations that actually have very little to do with reason. They don't have a reason. We didn't even try to invent a reason that the tree that it's in the side made us to do the curve this way. No, we really liked the curves and we did them this way, on purpose, saying we like this, aesthetically speaking. We want to impose the aesthetic and give freedom to the program to happen. So every square has a kind of different shape, and they're combined to create more height or less, or different types of spaces. And they're just, we're just working in the practicalities on how to access them or close them or open them and place them in the landscape, not in a complete random way, but in a way decided to create a passage within different moments of the place. So a little bit again of thinking how, instead of thinking on a house, thinking on a living and how a person can make a house out of those structures. And so we had to definitely label the spaces. I hope when a client comes and buys this place, they don't label the space for them so they can really use them as they want. Definitely there are some that are labeled, and this is something that allows us to start thinking on the next step of a research, and that's the bathroom. The kitchen, maybe, but the kitchen in cities has also become something different. So this project actually has allowed us to go into a deeper research and a little bit thinking on our idea of compartmenting the volumes into the most divisible part possible about programs in separate volumes, etc., or this one of understanding each model to be inhabited as the person really needs to or wants to. allow us to start thinking if we could think that for modern living in cities. We're right now doing that research in the office. It's very early stages of the research, but we are thinking, okay, the landscape is nice, and inhabiting the landscape is nice, and there are many ways, and we've experimented all those, but we really need to think how we inhabit these dense areas. No, this is Mexico City, which is incredible extent. It goes really beyond mountains. We're in a valley. We thought the valley was going to stop growing, to stop the growth of the city, but guess what? It hasn't. We go beyond that. And the city is just immense. Why we have to house 22 million people? So this is making us think, what happens if we create modules that give more flexibility? This is a little bit what people do when they build their own spaces. We are, as architects, I think we're imposing a little bit also a way of living. Can we create like modules that people understand how to inhabit themselves, or can they inform us to do that? This is just a start of a reflection that we're trying to thinking that the bathroom and the kitchen could be the modules that will be directed only, and the rest probably could start spreading, or I don't know, inhabiting in different ways. Definitely it's a question of who is starting to impose the way we live, you know? How we all imagine the perfect life. Is it being imposed? Is it being imposed by many ways, in many ways, or we really, all of us, all human beings want to live the same way? I do think it's a little bit imposed, no? This idea of having the perfect family in the perfect house with your garden that you can lawn yourself, in the beautiful landscape. And this is something that incredibly, for me, it's even unthinkable that people that come from such a different culture as like in the middle of Sri Lanka, or people in the middle of North Carolina, they all want to live the same. Why? Why? We don't have the same conditions, not one single individual. This is doing a lot of harm in the world. Besides, obviously, homogenizing everything, well, I don't know, that word, everything, I think it's also creating incredible contradictions in each individual, because it's very hard, like, for example, for people here in New York trying to live in the suburbs, which they really don't because they commute for hours, or for maybe an hour, it's already a lot, to come to work here and then live in kind of the suburbs, but it's not the suburbs because it's still not the complete suburbs, it's not the complete outdoors, or creating the big problem we have of housing in Mexico. This is the ideal way of living that developers are selling to people of low income in Mexico City. And it is definitely trying to replicate the ideal life of suburbia life that it was started, I think, in the beginning of last century here in the US. The problem here is that we have a totally different context. Especially the first different thing is these people is the lowest income people, the lowest working income people in Mexico, and this is called social housing, and this is even promoted by the government, versus the free market or the free idea of suburbia that it's here, that there's people that there are developers selling it, and people that are buying it is not subsidized by the government or even encouraged by directly, one could say. This is doing a lot of damage right now. There's 11 million people living in these houses, and they're 30% abandoned, the houses. They're being abandoned because they are totally isolated from city centers. People have to spend half of their day, literally, commuting to work, and half of their salary to do that. And then they have the rest to pay for the mortgage for the house. The house has zero value, resale value because there's no one who wants to really be there. They only buy it because that's the opportunity for them to buy a house. And it was a very successful program. They were selling houses per millions, literally, every year in the 2000s. And right now it's obviously started to become a huge problem. Two things. One is because they started to become abandoned and people is going back to the cities to live wherever. And secondly, because people are losing their money. They're abandoning the houses, leaving the mortgages away and going just out of there because they don't really can create a life. Even if they're painted in rainbow colors, that's nowhere near to a real life. The ideal of these, or the idea behind it is that you have a piece of land with a garden, with your garage on the front, and that you have then your perfect life. It has become also a problem for me on identity. When you live in one of these places, in one of these houses, you become a number. When you're a number, you can be anything, from a set of bricks, or a piece of junk, or a piece of a product in a store. The losing identity, it's a big problem. Also, the second big problem for me is that cities, the urban development, is being directed by these developers, private developers, with no real intersection with government programs. So these satellite cities that are being created because the developers go there, buy land, build 20,000 units in once, sell them, people inhabiting them, 60,000 people there, in the outskirts of a city, then obviously the city has to arrive. There's nothing, there's no infrastructure, no connections, no nothing, no schools, no jobs, no nothing. City has to arrive because there's a lot of demand, and then the cities are being shaped by these people. We need to understand how to compact the centers. And for that, I started being very critic and creating a research to go back to the government saying, starting to have a voice, doing a group of architects of my generation to also, that were also concerned on this topic, to also become open about it, because I think we also architects were not even strong enough to say anything, and started to say things and thinking literally out of the box. One of the main arguments, which is pretty easy for us to understand, but really is not so easy to understand for developers or government, is that we might just not think of the house. Developers and government are thinking on the house. All the policies were thinking on how these 43 square meters should have to be designed and defined, and all the rules that it had to imply. But actually, no one was really interested in the environment and what's happening in the surroundings. And I always put it before the example of New York City. Why in the world would people pay tons of money for a studio of 300 square foot in New York, that it's old, falling apart, noisy, horrible pipes, millions of dollars to pay for it? And why? Because it's New York City, because it offers jobs, culture, education, it has a lot of infrastructure, and your house becomes the city. That's problematic. Yeah, we're not going to go into that discussion, but actually we can take advantage of cities in that sense. So again, connecting to our way of thinking before is, why don't we create the smallest and possible structure, really nice, livable space that everybody can shape, using the city as the living space, using the city as their living room, as their kitchen, as their studio, as everything else. And how important is that? How important the context that surround any project that we're doing in the middle of nowhere for rich people, or the context that really surrounds these, interfere with it. Not only the weather, the topography, the the orientation, but really the social connections, the community or the not community or the not the social connections. And then we started being able to do little work in this direction. It was not so easy. I then understood also that it was very difficult to arrive to a place that, you know, everything's wrong and we have to start from scratch. You cannot do this anymore. And versus to trying to understand how with the conditions that they were, we could do something, no? And we could start doing things. Also, I think that was part of the problem where architects were like really starting to become behind the problem, because it's really too difficult to say, okay, we have to start from scratch, zero, nothing that you have done works. And so we said, okay, we got this opportunity of designing. There was a tragedy, there's a mudslide in these hills, and it took like 600 houses away. Also, unfortunately, there were people dying, not as much as it could have been, because it was 600 houses that were wiped by the mud. And the government had a plan to rebuild these 600 houses in this site. And the plan obviously was doing an array of 600 houses aligned in streets, straight streets, like just bringing the bulldozers, taking away the terrain, planing it, and doing these straight lines of roads and houses just array like there. We were able to convince them to allow us to do the master plan. So they say, okay, you do the master plan, the house is designed, the architect is hired, and that's it, you cannot do anything. This module is perfectly up to our standards, and you have to use that house. And we said, okay, we can work with that. And we decided to create, like, understand the place, go work with the topography, which is obvious for you that are architects in the public, but it's not for many people. And so we worked with the topography. It was kind of easy. And also we worked with the idea of this being a little neighborhood. What a neighborhood represents, what are the characteristics of a neighborhood, how we could create a place that people would really go there and live there and not go back to the hills to invade the hills, which they did before, to build their own houses in 2 years. Because if they would have put in these rows of houses, that's what exactly was going to happen. These people would have returned to the hills. So, so we did a clear center, and from there we started to do little smaller blocks or neighborhoods where we, as more as you went out of the center of the place, you had more individual houses. So we used the same unit of the house. We stacked it in the center to create more density, and then we did duplexes, putting two together, and then we did the single houses more to the outskirts. And this is how the master plan looked, and this is how finally the project is. The houses, as I said, we didn't design them, and we actually used the accidents of the topography to allow us to create these spaces, strange spaces. But these strange spaces, we all know they're spaces. They're spaces that create community life, social tissue. People are allowed to be identified themselves with the place. I live nearby where the strange part of the street goes up. I live where you see the steps that they need to go to my door, that's my house. It's not just an array of houses, and it's using one single same model of house. This place now, it's incredibly popular. People are reselling their houses for a lot of money, which that is a little bit not something that we wanted, but the good part is that they really like the place, and that's why, because it's really a little village that allows people to feel that they are in a neighborhood, that they're individuals, that they can create their family, and then they can meet a community. Then we were commissioned for a totally different project, and that's the last project I'm going to speak about it. And it's also a house for very poor people. The other house that I showed and the problematic of social housing is for people that have a formal job. So these program in the government is for people that have no formal job and have no way of getting a credit. And this is normally for single houses that are almost self-built. This program exists, has like, you have to, if you are an NGO or a financial institution, non-profit financial institution, you can register yourself and your house model into this governmental program, and then people can choose from these models, build their own houses, get a loan for the house, or even get a big subsidy on the cost of the house. And so we were hired by a small financial institution, non-profit, that wanted to create a model for this program. And I said, well, there's a problem. There's 100 or more models out in the market that probably have studied the problematic, because they all need to cost between $7,000 and $9,000. And for me, there was another problem. They were all mocking the idea of the ideal life. No? They were all like archetypical houses, and I was kind of skeptical about what could have been done there. So the conditions is that you had to build a house of minimum 430 square feet that cost between $6,000 and $9,000 US, and that could be self-built. It could be assisted, or it could be completely built, but it could also needed to be also able to be self-built. I said, well, we don't do it if we're not able to create a model that gives more space, because for me that's too little space, that is more possible to be adapted to different contexts, because believe it or not, these houses are designed, and a person from Chihuahua can choose one model, the same model that a person from Yucatan chooses. These are two totally different contexts, culturally speaking, even meteorologically speaking. I mean, these are really the opposite, and the houses are not adaptable, they're the same. And also for me, it was strange that none of them had the possibility of expansion. They're all very, volumetrically speaking, very finished, no? And so we started designing. We started saying, okay, we're going to break the idea of the ideal house. We think we can introduce these possibilities with the model. Let's study if we can. And we designed many possible projects. And then we realized we really didn't know these people. I started wondering why all these models look the same, why they don't have flexibility, why they don't have adaptability, if it's possible. Because when we started all these possibilities, we understood it was possible to do it with that little money. So we said, well, there has to be a reason, and we're not getting it. So we started saying we have to interview these people because we think we know them. We sometimes are very selfish, thinking we all know, we architects know everything, or if we don't, we can study it, right? But in real life, we don't. So we went and interviewed these people. We went to try to understand them. We did around 2,000 interviews. The good thing is that we had the network because of the client. She already had this finance institution financing different things. So we had the people, and we did it, and we found out a very interesting thing. I always thought that the result of all these houses being that was this idea of selling the perfect life again. And we found a very interesting thing. It wasn't. It had a specific reason, and that was because people wanted the houses to look finished, and that was their idea of a house looked finished was a house that looked like the archetypical form of a house. And why they wanted to look finished? Because in Mexico there was a moment where people started building their own houses in the 70s, 80s, where there was a boom of concrete brick construction, and they were leaving the steel bars up. They do like the roof, and the steel bars were still up to show like the possibility of going up a second floor. Sometimes it happened, but in the majority of cases, the house remained with the first floor, the slab, and the steel bars out. And right now, that it's really became a sign of failure. So people really didn't want to relate one single thing with that, not even the flat roof, not even the bricks, nothing. So, so we understood that, and one of the main things is that they were willing to give up the possibility of expansion if the house didn't look finished. So we had a big challenge then. So then there was the real challenge. We thought that when the client arrived, it was a big challenge. Now we had one, but we needed to find a solution where a house looked like the archetypical form. It needed to become modular for us, to be flexible, to adapt to different ways of living. In Chiapas, they use a wood oven kitchen. In the north of the country, they use more of modern kitchen as we know it. Or a bathroom, the same thing. And so we use the scheme that we actually use in the Ordos house, where it's an archetypical form of a house, and that it's modular in a way that you can take modules and still looked that it's a complete volume, or described as a complete module. And that also allows us to think that we could do part of it in a material that it's costly, highly costly for this budget, and part of it were a more temporary material. So we developed this model of this house that we presented also in the Chicago Biennial, and that it's, we did 2 prototypes, and now it's being built in hundreds. I mean, the finance institution says they're going to build thousands. I'm a little bit scared till today, but in hundreds it's being built now. And it's been accepted because it has many possibilities. It can become a lot of things. It's not so directed, and it really has the possibility of expanding in different ways, in different moments of their lives, but also in different ways, in different possibilities, different programs. We're using, as I said, 2 materials. One is like probably adobe brick or panels, depending on the area, or wood, and one more of industrial wood, even waste, like pallets, to have this possibility of having more space since the beginning with the same amount of money. This is the model we presented in Chicago. These are the 2 prototypes we did first. And then we were called to do this house in a unit, one of those units that I'm so against of. But that there was a tragedy, there was a tornado that wiped out a lot of houses, specifically this completely destroyed 23 of them. And so we had to rebuild them with our model. This was the commission, and we thought it was a good idea because it was a good moment to test the house if it really was adaptable to even this condition. And so it's a condition where the original houses are the same amount of square meters, but they're just distributed differently. So here you can see the original model of house. Those houses are the ones we rebuilt with our model, with the same money, same restrictions, same everything. And we, to start, have almost double the space. We liberate almost double of the space that they had in their plots for different things. And we thought we're going to create a social problem. The good thing or the bad thing is that it was understood that these people really got their houses destroyed. But because the houses really are the same, and they should be the same, but they're really way much more. Also, they are adaptable, and they are expandable, and they are a little bit more understandable, or not understandable, flexible to their conditions. And with this, I'm going to end up my presentation, and I think we can open it to questions. Thank you very much.
So I wanted to start by asking you, you started with a story about a project, and you didn't show us the project. And I guess I was also, knowing your work pretty well and having seen it recently, I had the privilege to be in Mexico City and also to visit your office, which was fantastic. But I was wondering if you could maybe tell us just briefly a little bit about the residential buildings in Lyon, in France, that you're working on.
Sure. That's a very interesting project for us. It's a very challenging as well. We're doing 3 buildings in Lyon, France. They're finished now. I was there last week. They're up to their height. They're finished in terms of structure. Now they're going to start with finishes. And it's a master plan done by Herzog and Nemeron, and the city decided to start with the first block, being as a representative block of the whole master plan that was designed by them. And they decided to choose 5 different architects to design this whole block. We got to have three buildings in this block, and so 2 of the buildings, it's a mixed-use block. So it's a very high-end residential tower designed by Herzog and Nemeron. And then there's 3 social housing buildings. We are doing 2. 2 other residential housing, not super high-end as the tower. An office building, a mixed program with a nursery and some housing. And what was, I think, very important for us, it was how to act in a total different context, how to act in France. I also think that in this lecture, which was not the topic, I was not focusing on our approach to materiality. A little bit I touched it, but for us it was difficult to understand how we would act in a context that is so different, that has so different conditions of building, that it has become absolutely more totally directed. Even we were at the beginning thinking, what are we going to design if the code already tells us where to put the bed in a room? I mean, there's very little things to do. And at the end, we were obviously managing how to corrupt the system and build a little bit impose a little bit our ideas on these buildings. I think that the most important thing that has done that project to our office is that the possibility of us thinking and how to act in total different contexts and how to react to that, but also the possibility of understanding in deep the process, the program of social housing in France, which is important and has a very important history, and how it's been integrated into urban areas, and how it's being even built and encouraged in these super extraordinary neighborhoods. Something that it's really unthinkable right now in Mexico City or in Mexico anywhere. And so many of those things also happened in the way we were also doing the social housing research, and also our proposals of understanding how even the political definitions of house, of that program in France define the space, and how these political definitions in Mexico are defining the space and how we can change them. I think that was the most important things that we've achieved there.
I mean, it's important, I think, in a way to give context a little bit to the broader, or let's say the broader, from the lecture, a kind of broader context to the work you're doing in the office, but then also the physical space within which you are actually working on these projects. Because in a way, a little bit, maybe the lecture, I think you present the houses, the kind of leisure, right? And this idea of learning to live in this space, that maybe there's some of the identity of the architecture comes through the client, right? But then as you shift from house to housing, and then particularly I think in this bigger scale, in the project in France, and I've heard you talk about it through the idea that maybe something different happens almost in each unit. Like how do you deal with that as a kind of problem? But I think in dealing with this idea of living as a creative problem, right? And that's one that occupies your office, and it's a very open office, and it's a large office, I think, roughly like 40 people, right? So I would be curious and interested to hear you talk a little bit more about that, and as how these projects coexist in the office, because I think they very much do, and it's very apparent, so that it's not a matter of a kind of bracketing in the way that the lecture is structured, as all lectures have to be structured in some fashion, right? But that it's very much, I think, a kind of back and forth, and you're thinking during projects being simultaneous, sitting next to each other in the office. And maybe you could just give us a little more sense of what it's like in the office, how you approach these conversations and maybe how these things are influencing each other.
Absolutely. I think I wanted to really focus in something because in a way, I think our work, if I present it all, or even when you're in the office, you could think I'm kind of schizophrenic because it's so very different. I mean, a little bit here already, passing from a house that it has like 10,000 square feet and it costs like 7,000 per square feet, no? Yeah. No, I'm exaggerating, but to a house that it's $7,000 per the whole unit. Also in the office happens that, but I think it really, like, one thing informs the other in a ways that it's not easy to understand until we put the work together like I did, for example, today. We're working in so different programs. I mean, we're very, very lucky to be thinking in things like a botanical garden at the same time as a church or as a museum in a Jesuit college. Old Jesuit college, abandoned Jesuit college in Spain, in social housing in Mexico, in a very small town that right now we're working. Or, for example, we're doing a project in San Francisco of a power plant. So we really have the opportunity of dealing with so many different programs that at some point becomes schizophrenic, even for me. I mean, I'm in a moment thinking on how a transformer cannot be moved because it might explode if we put it in a different position. And the second minute I have to review the idea of have to create a master plan for a very small town where we have to create a program of social housing. So it is a schizophrenic, but I think in a way allowing us to think on the idea of creating a substation that looks as an icon for the site in San Francisco, but at the same time being able to understand what a person that has no resources and that has a very difficult political situation in a very small town can allow us to think on that, no? Can really this inform us for a lot of things, because in a way we're thinking in how beauty could enhance a substation, but at the same time, if you resume it, it's the same, no? We have to think how beauty can really enhance the life of these people. So we're thinking on beauty, we're exercising on beauty on one, and we're doing the same in the other one. And I don't know why we have all these programs. We're also doing a church or a market or a huge university building in Mexico City. And all these work, probably if we put it together, we would have to spend like 3 more hours here. But I think we could totally find a connection. For example, this idea of thinking on how to respond to a place by adapting volumes to dividing the program into a single, more simplest, not simplistic, but simple thing that it functions, that it holds. It comes from the botanical garden. So it is probably taking from there when we started doing the Ventura house, that we split the program and we created a volume per area. But in the botanical garden had a specific purpose of allowing you to really be in a botanical garden always, no? So this compartmentalization of volumes would allow you to always have to exit, not allow you to, force you to exit all the time and remind you that you're in a botanical garden. And this completely informs also, again, going back, if you think of this Hollow House proposal, the second one, even that, no? And I think it works. I mean, it is schizophrenic. It's a big office, and this is why I on purpose did it completely open, and people of the same team are working in these opposite projects, because I do think they need to be informed, no? I think if you are focused totally in solving the life of these people in this little town, probably you're going to miss the broader picture if you're not seeing at the same time a church, no, or this power plant.
Maybe we could open it up for some questions. Anyone have any questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you again for this. It's pretty nice. You talk a lot about the sort of kind of like the horizontal, I mean, yeah, like horizontal sort of kind of like living. And I'm just kind of curious about the vertical sort of kind of like living. I don't know, like how can we understand it? Because it's very repetition and it's very pancake sort of kind of like. I don't know.
It's funny you asked. This is exactly my studio in Colombia this semester. For me, that's one of the topics that that it still needs to be really rethought. We know now that densifying the city centers is what we need to do. We have understood that suburbs doesn't completely work, and that more and more people is coming back to the city. We're going to be 70% of the population, we all know, living in urban areas by very near future. And I still think that what exactly you say is what's missing. The typology of the skyscraper doesn't allow real life to happen. I think that life ends and starts almost in the lobby of these skyscrapers. No, you enter there. There's a capsule that sucks you up, and then you are in a completely different world. And you can be anywhere. No, when you're already immersed in these buildings, you can be anywhere. Yeah, I mean, just the view connects you to where you are, but you could be anywhere. And right now we're studying if there's a possibility of having a more diversity and a possibility of by architecture, by design, also allowing more of a life to happen there, more of a neighborhood-like life there. And we're right now studying there. I encourage you to see our work for final reviews, like in 15 days. Let's see if we're able to solve it or not, to make an intelligent proposal.
Any other questions? Yes. Yeah. That'd be great.
So you spoke about the suburbs having like a consistent kind of like this consistent way of being built, and it almost made it like I would like to say soulless. Like people were just kind of leaving there because they felt like they had no purpose, or there was no. I'm not sure how to describe it, but then you deployed the method of like creating like moments within the community. So my question is your study of this more personal and like engaging with people, the people of the community socially? Is that like an importance to you? Because I felt like just seeing that study was very touching, because that's something similar to like I wanted to.
It started about the idea of thinking why I thought these, because my first approach to these units that are created in Mexico was really of rejection. And in my first part of the research was understanding not why they're so wrong, but just how we have to do them in a different way, no? And when I did all that research and I presented it to the government, to the institution that is like almost in charge of this program, social housing program, and like is the promoter in a way of these units that appeared everywhere in Mexico, and I really got rejected from what I saw. I thought I needed to understand exactly why I rejected them so much. I needed to understand why I thought they were so wrong, to really have a clearer vision, no? And not just saying it's just wrong and we have to do this, but why and how. And this is when I understood that how the very little promotion of social life is happening. And yeah, it's a personal interest, more about, it's obviously a lot about to do with the architecture. I mean, because I show you a project that it's with the architecture, with the same, playing with the same rules, doing a different thing, allowing, it allows to do a different thing, so architecture does a lot. But also it's about politics. It's about a law that needs to be changed in order to produce better places, because the law, how it is now, it's very easy to go the other way and to do things that what you saw, no? So I'm focused in architecture. I'm because that's my field, that's my expertise. But I think at the end, architecture is absolutely social, no? So we need to speak about community and social in sociology, no, and life, with no doubt, as architects.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Hi. My question is really vague, but I'm curious, like, what your thoughts on like the kind of extreme costs of like a top architectural education, like particularly in the city, like how that affects kind of like the demographic of who has these top educations, and like how it affects who they design for, and like their ability to kind of be empathetic or understand those people even if they are designing for. Like what you're talking about, how you like hit that like wall and you had to go interview people. So I'm just curious like what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, my major concern has been that it's very unfortunate that all these talented people, since the education is so expensive, they have to go out when they start their professional lives to work with a commercial firm to pay for their studies. And waste, for me, it's a kind of waste of all this talent. Well, it could be not wasted if then we change those firms, but I don't think that's going to happen. That's being too idealistic. But it's very unfortunately that probably like people for us, it's very difficult to hire all these talented people that go out from these universities, because we cannot pay for them to repay their studies. So I think that is a real problem, because I think that these are the most talented people, and then they really could do a lot of good in other places, no? Where really their ideas and their thoughts could be really implemented. And it's very little amount of those students that could really go and do it. In my case, I had the opportunity of doing whatever, because I didn't have the weight of a loan to pay. So I was able I had more freedom in a way, no? I didn't have the base of the incredible education that you can have in these universities, but I didn't also have the weight. So it has also its disadvantages, because I also had to learn all these good things that you can learn in this education for 6 years, I don't know, or 7 or 8, or as long as you get. I'm still learning them, now. I had to learn them the hard way. But it gave me a lot of freedom that I didn't have the weight of a loan to repay. So I think that's something to rethink on how this can be changed, no?
Hi, good night. Thank you for La Charla. It was fantastic to see all that work. I think you spoke a little bit about myth making or myth destructing in architecture. I think your work does that quite a bit, particularly on the subject of materials and how it associates from certain connotations, disassociates, sort of pulls in, pulls out. That's my reading of it. Do you think of your own myths as a Mexican architect, a female Mexican architect who has had experiences through the 90s, through the early millennium, and now in a new frontier, this technological, mechanical production, renovation, and revolution, really? How do you see yourself in the Mexican scene? What is the Mexican scene, and what do you think it can do for us, for young architects, for Latinos everywhere, for anyone who's interested in the disassociation of certain structures, of what we typically think of as Latino architecture or any kind of North American architecture?
It has always been very hard for me to place me somewhere, obviously. I mean, I don't think on that. I just continue working, but obviously there's a lot of questions all the time about it, and one of the most interesting questions that I got at the time is like, what do you think you can give to, because I mean, I have to give a little bit of the context. When we did this house and it was showed in the Chicago Biennial, then it was very published, and a lot of people in the world thought that we were doing this house for $7,000, that it could be built anywhere in the world, which is not true. I mean, this is a very context-related project, and it's obviously not $7,000 in the US or in Europe, or it needs to be studied everywhere differently. Even I think the architectures would change. And so, but they called us for thinking if this could be a program that could be adapted for Syrian refugees in Europe. And they asked me, why do you think you could give something to Europe that not an architect from Europe could give, no? And I don't know if it was a question from them or it was a question from me, maybe. But I immediately thought that what we have is that we're trained to really work with the minimum, to do the maximum out of the minimum. And that, I think that's a chip that we have internally, at least I do, and I think we all do, because we have to live like this, that it's really, really good in this moment, I think, of the world that we're living in, no? Even though if we have like an incredibly large budget, I personally almost don't know what to do with it. I mean, you saw the house we did in the hills, which obviously has a very large budget. It's still doing a lot with not all the money that there is, no? So I think that this is something that we have, no? For example, in Lyon, that's something, it was really almost funny. The first meeting we had, and the developers presented the project to us, the architects, and the teams are very different, very varied, mostly from Switzerland, 2 from France, and us from Mexico. From the people of France, it was a normal project for them, regular type of thing, commission-wise, money-wise, everything. For the Swiss, they were like really outraged. They really couldn't believe that they were going to work with that small fee, but also they couldn't believe that they were going to build with that budget, you know? And for us, it was like, really, are we gonna do social housing for that money per square feet? And that's what they're gonna pay for us? I mean, really? You know, so, and starting a project, thinking you can do a lot, makes a big difference, no? We were really excited about being able to do social housing and thinking that we could do window shutters. I mean, it was like, we don't have that luxury even in the more expensive houses, no? That we were able to use wood floors in social housing. This was like, what? Really? Can we put wood floors? Really? And for the Swiss, it was like, wow, no, we cannot do like this special detail. Can we not design our light? No? So I think this is something we have in our DNA, that it's something we can give out there to the world. No?
All right. Any more? You want to take any more questions? One more, maybe? Okay. All right. Thank you, Tatiana.
Thank you. Thank you very much.